There was something wrong with the way my son-in-law left that voicemail. Not what he said, what he didn't say. He called on a Tuesday, late enough that I'd already turned off the kitchen light and was sitting in the dark with my coffee going cold. His voice was too steady. Men don't get that steady unless they're working at it. "Hey Norm, just letting you know we're going out of town this weekend. Probably not back until Monday. You don't need to come by." I hadn't said I was coming by. That's the part I couldn't shake. I hadn't mentioned anything about visiting. My daughter lived 40 minutes from me, outside Knoxville, in a house they bought 3 years ago when things between them still looked fine from the outside. I made it out there maybe once a month. We hadn't talked about me coming that weekend, so why was he telling me not to? I set the phone down and sat there for a while. I'm 63 years old. I've been wrong about plenty of things in my life. I've jumped to conclusions that embarrassed me, so I told myself I was doing it again. I told myself Victor was just being casual, that the message didn't mean what I was turning it into, that my daughter Laurel was fine. I told myself that for about 4 days. Then I drove out on Saturday morning. I want to explain something first, because people who haven't been in this situation will wonder why it took me that long, why I didn't just call her, why I didn't push harder earlier. I want to explain it because it matters. Laurel was 31. She wasn't a child. She had made it very clear, not in any single conversation, but in the accumulation of 100 small moments over 2 years, that she needed me to let her handle her life. The last time I'd expressed concern about Victor, she'd gone quiet on the phone and then said very calmly, "Dad, you don't know him the way I do." And I'd backed off. Because that's what you do when your daughter says that. You back off and you trust her and you hope you're wrong. But I hadn't been wrong. I'd just been too slow to act on what I already knew. I pulled up to their house at about 9 in the morning. His truck was in the driveway. Her car was there too. They weren't out of town. They were home. I sat in my own truck for a moment and looked at the house. The blinds on the front windows were all the way down, which was unusual. Laurel liked the morning light. She always had. Ever since she was a kid, she'd be up before everyone else, pulling curtains open, making noise. The house felt closed up in a way that had nothing to do with the weather. I knocked on the front door, waited, knocked again. Victor answered. He had that look people get when they're deciding in real time what version of themselves to present. He settled on friendly confused. "Norm, hey, what are you doing here?" "Thought I'd stop by," I said. "Bring some of those tomatoes from the garden. Laurel likes them." I held up the bag. He looked at it. There was a half second where I could see him calculating. "She's not feeling great," he said. "Migraine? She's in the bedroom with the lights off." "Oh?" I nodded. "Well, I won't stay long. Just want to drop these off and see her face for a minute." "I'll tell her you came by." He said it the way you'd say it to a stranger, not to the father of your wife. I kept my hand on the door frame. I didn't push inside. I didn't make a scene. I just said, "Victor, let me see my daughter." Something shifted in his face. I don't know what to call it exactly. It wasn't quite anger. It was more like recalculation. He stepped back and let me in. The house was dim. Television on low in the living room, some home renovation show with the volume turned down to almost nothing. I followed him toward the hallway, and he knocked on the bedroom door and called her name. She said something I couldn't make out. He opened the door and stood in the frame so I couldn't see past him. "Your dad's here," he said. "You feel up to saying hi?" A pause. Then, "Yeah, okay." He stepped to the side. Laurel was sitting up in bed. She had the sheet pulled up to her waist, and she was wearing a long-sleeved shirt in the middle of June. Her hair was down. She smiled at me, and the smile went up on the left side of her face a little more than the right, and something pulled tight in my chest because I knew that smile. I'd seen that smile when she was 8 years old and had done something she didn't want me to know about. She was working for that expression. It wasn't natural. "Hey, Dad." "Hey, sweetheart." I looked at Victor. He was leaning against the doorframe. Mind giving us a minute? I said. He smiled at me. Course not. But he didn't move. I turned back to Laurel. How's the migraine? Better. It's getting better. Her hands were in her lap, fingers together. I looked at her left wrist. There was a bruise disappearing under the sleeve, dark enough that I could see the edge of it. Laurel, I said. Dad, can you come out to the kitchen with me? I want to show you what I brought. She looked at Victor. That look, the quick, involuntary look to see how he'd react, was the thing that finally put a name to the feeling I'd been carrying around for months. That look wasn't the look of a wife checking in with her husband. That look wasn't the look of a wife checking in with her husband. That was the look of someone checking whether it was safe. Sure, she said. Yeah. She got up carefully, slowly in a way that wasn't about being sleepy. Victor watched from the door as we walked to the kitchen. I put the bag of tomatoes on the counter and kept my back to him so he couldn't read my face. I said, I think you should come home with me today. She started shaking her head immediately. Dad, I'm fine. I didn't ask if you were fine. I asked you to come home with me. It's not. She stopped, started again, quieter. You don't understand the whole situation. I understand what I saw on your wrist. She pulled her sleeve down further, which told me everything I needed to confirm. Her eyes went to the doorway. Victor was still there, pretending not to listen to a conversation happening 10 feet from him. I need you to pack a bag, I said. My voice was low. Right now, whatever you need for a week. You can come back for the rest. Heal. I'm your father. She looked at me. I don't know what she saw in my face. Whatever it was, something settled in her. She nodded, once, small. She went back to the bedroom. Victor followed her. I stood in the kitchen and listened to the low sound of voices, his sharper, hers quieter, and I thought about the fact that I was 63 years old and alone in a kitchen while my daughter packed a bag under those conditions, and there was nothing I could do about the voices except stand there and wait. She came out with a canvas bag over her shoulder. Victor was behind her. She doesn't need to do this, he said to me. Directly to me this time, not to her. Man to man, like she wasn't standing right there. Whatever she's told you. She hasn't told me anything, I said. I can see. We looked at each other. I am not a large man, and I am 63, and I am aware that in a physical sense, I was not a significant obstacle. But I've learned that men like Victor don't actually want physical confrontation. What they want is compliance. What they depend on is everyone around them deciding it isn't worth it to make a scene. I was perfectly willing to make a scene. He seemed to understand that. He stepped back. We walked out to my truck. Laurel didn't say anything for the first 15 minutes of the drive. I didn't push. I just drove north on 441 with the windows cracked and the radio off and let the silence be what it needed to be. Then she said, "How did you know?" "The voicemail," I said. "He called to tell me not to come. I hadn't said anything about coming." She made a sound that was almost a laugh. "That sounds like him." "How long?" She looked out the window. "Longer than I want to tell you." "Okay." "He never." She stopped. "It wasn't constant. It would go months and be fine, and I'd convince myself it was over, and then something would happen, and it would start again." "What started it this time?" "I was on the phone with you last Tuesday for 40 minutes. He said that was too long, that I was complaining about him." I hadn't known that she'd been on the phone with me for 40 minutes, and that the price of that phone call had been a bruise on her wrist and a drawn blind and a voicemail telling her father not to come by. I had to keep my eyes on the road and my hands steady on the wheel. She stayed with me for 6 days before she was willing to call anyone official. I understood that too. The calling makes it real in a different way. The calling starts a process that takes on its own momentum and stops being in your control. I didn't rush her. I just made sure the guest room was made up and the coffee was on in the morning and that she knew I was not going anywhere. On the fourth day, she came out of the guest room at 2 in the afternoon and sat down at the kitchen table and said, "There's something I need to tell you, something I didn't tell you in the car." Okay. She had her hands around a mug. She looked at the table when she talked. "When I was packing the bag," she said, "I went into the closet to get my good sneakers, and I heard something, a sound. She stopped. "There's a storage space in the back of the closet, behind where the winter coats hang. There's a small door." I waited. The sound was coming from behind that door. She looked up at me. "I've heard it before. I told myself it was the pipes, or mice or something. I didn't let myself think about what else it could be." "What did you do?" "I opened the door." Her hands had gone white around the mug. "There was a little girl in there," she said. "Not small, maybe 8 or 9, sitting in the corner. She had a blanket. There were water bottles." She looked at me and put her finger to her lips. I did not move for a moment. "Whose child?" "Victor has a sister," Laurel said. "Pamela. She moved away years ago, before I knew him. They had some kind of falling out. I've never met her, but he had a niece. I knew that much. He mentioned her once, a long time ago. Just once." I stood up. I didn't mean to. I just stood up. "I closed the door again," Laurel said, and her voice broke on that. "I know how that sounds. I need you to understand. I was terrified. He was right behind me. My wrist. I was scared of what he'd do if I did anything. I just picked up my bag and I walked out with you and I." "You got yourself out first," I said. "That's what you did." "I left her there." "You got yourself out first so you could get help. That's different." She looked at me. She needed to believe that. I don't know if she did. We called 911 that afternoon. Laurel told them everything. The Sevier County Sheriff's Department sent 2 cars to Victor's house. I drove behind them with Laurel, and she sat in the passenger seat and didn't say a word the entire way. They found the little girl. She was still in the storage space. Her name was Ruby. She was 8 years old. She had been in that house, in that closet, in that space, for, the investigators later determined, approximately 31 days. She was thin. She was dehydrated. She had marks on her that the pediatric examination documented, and that I will not describe here because some things should not be put into plain language. Victor was arrested at his workplace that evening. He had apparently gone in to work a Monday shift as if nothing in the world were different. Pamela, Ruby's mother, had died of an overdose 6 weeks prior in Cincinnati. Victor was listed as next of kin. He had driven up to claim the child and had brought her back to Knoxville, and he had put her in that closet, and he had gone on living his regular life. I don't know the full legal reasoning for all of it. Attorneys used words I had to look up. What I understood was that he was charged with multiple felonies and that the DA's office described it as one of the most disturbing cases of child confinement they had prosecuted. He pled not guilty. They tried him 11 months later. He was convicted on all counts. The sentence was 47 years. Ruby was placed with a foster family outside Maryville while the proceedings were ongoing. Laurel started asking questions, very carefully, through the right channels, working with a caseworker about what the process would look like to become a licensed foster placement. That process took 14 months. There was paperwork and home studies and background checks and classes on trauma-informed care. There were delays and setbacks and a period of about 6 weeks where it seemed like it wasn't going to happen for reasons that had more to do with bureaucracy than anything else. Ruby moved in with Laurel on a Thursday in October. She's been there 2.5 years now. She's 11. She's in the 5th grade. She has opinions about what's for dinner, and she learned to ride a bike on my driveway last summer, and she still, every so often, goes very quiet in a way that I recognize and I know means she's somewhere else for a moment. I don't push when that happens. I just make sure she knows someone is nearby. Laurel is doing the paperwork for adoption. Her attorney says it should be finalized sometime next spring. I think about that voicemail sometimes. I think about how close I came to not driving out there, how easy it would have been to talk myself out of it. I was 63 years old with an instinct I couldn't prove. Calling my daughter might have made things worse. It wasn't my business. She'd told me to let her handle her life. I could have waited until Monday. I could have called instead of going. I could have stood on that porch and accepted the tomato excuse and the migraine excuse and driven home. My daughter would still be in that house. Ruby would still be in that closet. There is no version of wisdom that says you should ignore the voice that tells you something is wrong. You can be wrong. You can embarrass yourself. You can overstep. Those are small costs. The cost of the other direction is not small. I'm not telling the story because I did something remarkable. I drove 40 minutes and knocked on a door. That's not remarkable. I'm telling it because I almost didn't, because I sat in my kitchen for 4 days talking myself out of what I already knew. Listen to what you already know, even when you can't prove it, even when the other person has told you to stay out of it, even when you're 63 years old and tired and you don't want to make a scene. Especially then. I keep coming back to those 4 days I spent talking myself out of it. 4 days of telling myself I was overreacting, that I was the kind of father who couldn't let his daughter live her own life, that one odd voicemail didn't mean anything. I am 63 years old, and I've been wrong before about people, about situations, about the stories I told myself late at night. I know what it feels like to jump to the wrong conclusion. So I waited. I talked myself down. I was reasonable. And the whole time I was being reasonable, Ruby was in that closet. I don't say that to punish myself. I say it because I think we confuse being reasonable with being good. They're not the same thing. Reason tells you to wait for more evidence. It tells you not to cause a scene, not to overstep, not to embarrass yourself or your daughter by showing up uninvited. Reason is very good at building a case for staying home. What got me out of the house wasn't reason. It was something quieter and harder to name. It was the part of me that had spent 31 years paying attention to my daughter, her voice, her silences, the specific way she worked for a smile she didn't feel. You can't fake your way past that kind of attention. Victor could control what Laurel said to me on the phone. He couldn't control what I already knew about her. That knowledge, the kind you build slowly over decades of showing up, that's not instinct. That's something you earn. I think about that when I watch Ruby ride her bike in the driveway now, when she sits at the kitchen table and has opinions about dinner, when she goes quiet in that particular way, and I don't push, just stay nearby. I'm building that same thing with her, slowly, the way it actually works. Victor made choices, a long sequence of them, each one compounding the last. No single moment made him into the person who put a child in a closet. It was the accumulation of every small decision to take rather than give, to control rather than care, to treat other people's suffering as an inconvenience to be managed. That's not fate. That's not bad luck. That's the arithmetic of character, adding up over years until it becomes a sentence of 47 years in a Tennessee correctional facility. And Laurel made choices too, the hardest kind, the ones you make when you're scared and isolated and you've been told so many times that your own perception is wrong that you started to believe it. Walking out of that house with one bag took more out of her than I will probably ever fully understand. She got herself out. Then she told the truth about what she'd seen. That took something I don't have a clean word for. Not just courage. Something steadier than courage. The willingness to do the hard thing even when you're not sure you're strong enough to survive what comes after. I drove 40 minutes and knocked on a door. That's the whole of what I did. But I almost didn't. I almost let reason win. If there's anything I'd want someone to take from this, it's that the people in your life who matter, you know them in a way that can't be argued away. Trust that knowledge. Act on it, even when you can't prove it, even when it costs you something, especially when it costs you something. Ruby starts 5th grade in the fall. She picked out her own backpack. It's bright yellow. I think she's going to be okay.